I stood in the church parking lot, my Sunday dress collecting dust, surrounded by whispers sharp as knives. "You brought shame to this family." My stepfather roared in front of everyone, then his hand struck my cheek. I didn't cry. I just pressed play, and the entire crowd heard the truth they'd never wanted to believe. The recording echoed across the asphalt, his voice demanding money, calling the congregation sheep who only need a pretty story. That's when everything changed. My name is Madison Hale, and I never thought returning to Everton, Ohio would trap me in a web of religious manipulation and financial abuse. After the pandemic turned my life upside down, I accepted a position as a physical therapist at Pine Ridge Medical Center, grateful for stability in uncertain times. Moving back meant living near my mother Ruth, who'd remarried during my absence to Douglas Whitaker, a man whose reputation at Harvest Light Chapel preceded him like incense before a procession. Doug, as he insisted I call him, stood tall in his deacon's role, coordinating the church's compassion fund with the precision of a banker and the righteousness of a prophet. His salt and pepper beard was always perfectly trimmed, his suits pressed sharp enough to cut, and his voice carried that particular timbre that made congregants lean forward during his testimonies. He'd transformed my mother from the independent woman who raised me into someone who deferred every decision to what Doug thinks best. The house they shared, our house. He'd correct me, operated on Doug's schedule. Dinner at 6:30 sharp. Evening devotions at 8. Financial discussions every Sunday after church, which really meant Doug explaining how we should honor God with our resources. These sessions always ended the same way, with him sliding donation envelopes across the dining table, pre-filled with suggested amounts that would make my checking account weep. "Madison, dear," he'd say, that practiced smile never reaching his eyes, "the Lord has blessed you with steady employment. Surely you can spare more for those less fortunate." The Compassion Fund, he explained repeatedly, helped struggling families in our congregation pay rent, buy groceries, cover medical bills, noble causes that made refusing feel like spitting in God's face. My mother would sit beside him, hands folded, wearing that pleading expression I'd grown to dread. "It's about family unity, Madison. Doug works so hard for the church. Supporting his ministry supports us all." The way she said "us" made it clear I stood outside that circle unless I paid my way in. I started keeping records out of habit occupational hazard of working in healthcare where documentation could save your license. Every donation receipt, every text message where Doug requested emergency assistance for a family in crisis, every email about special offerings. My notebook filled with dates, amounts, and careful observations. 10% of my income became 15, then 20, always with some tragedy that needed immediate attention. The patterns emerged slowly. The Hendersons' medical emergency that required $500 happened the same week Doug bought new golf clubs. The Martinez family's car repair fund coincided with his and Mom's anniversary cruise. But these were just suspicious coincidences. Nothing concrete enough to challenge the man who led prayer circles and visited sick congregants with homemade casseroles my mother prepared. Sunday mornings became performances where I played the grateful stepdaughter while Doug played the benevolent patriarch. He'd rest his heavy hand on my shoulder during meet and greets, telling anyone who'd listen how proud he was that I'd returned to serve our community. "Family takes care of family." He'd boom, squeezing just hard enough to remind me of my place. The workspace at Pine Ridge became my sanctuary. Between patient sessions, I'd study my growing collection of receipts and bank statements, cross-referencing Doug's public fund reports with the reality in my notebook. My colleague would sometimes catch me frowning at my phone, but I'd wave it off as family stuff, which wasn't entirely a lie. 3 months after moving back, I'd donated over $4,000 to various emergency funds, none of which appeared in the church's official financial reports posted quarterly in the fellowship hall. The cognitive dissonance was eating me alive, watching Doug accept praise for his generosity while knowing my bank account and others were funding his comfortable lifestyle. But I kept silent, kept donating, kept documenting. Because in Everton, challenging church leadership meant challenging God himself. And I needed more than suspicions to take on a man who'd convinced an entire congregation he was their pathway to righteousness. The Sunday that changed everything started like any other. Service ended at 12:15, and the congregation filtered into the fellowship hall for coffee and gossip disguised as prayer requests. Doug stood near the door, shaking hands with his practiced warmth, while my mother arranged store-bought cookies on platters, pretending she'd baked them herself. "Madison," Pastor Williams called out, his voice carrying across the crowd. "Join us for lunch. We're celebrating our Volunteer Appreciation Month." The invitation wasn't really optional. Doug's eyes found mine across the room, that familiar look that said refusing would embarrass the family. 20 minutes later, our group of 12 squeezed into El Mariachi, the only decent restaurant in Everton's downtown. Doug orchestrated the seating like a conductor, positioning himself at the head of the merged tables, my mother to his right, me to his left where he could monitor my participation. The church volunteers filled the remaining seats: Sunday school teachers, choir members, and Lydia Monroe, the choir treasurer who always looked exhausted these days. "Order whatever you want," Doug announced magnanimously, gesturing at the menus. "Today we celebrate those who serve." He launched into one of his impromptu sermons about generosity and sacrifice, ordering the fajitas supreme platter and top-shelf margaritas for himself and my mother, while others chose modestly from the lunch specials. I watched him perform, noting how he touched my mother's hand when making points about partnership, how he name-dropped his connections at the regional church conference, how he kept mentioning the Whitaker family legacy of service. My chicken sandwich sat heavy in my stomach as the performance continued through 2 rounds of drinks he insisted everyone try. The check arrived as Doug was mid-story about funding a youth mission trip single-handedly. The server, a young woman who probably attended Everton Community College, placed the leather folder equidistant between us all. Doug didn't even glance at it. "Madison will handle this," he said smoothly, sliding the check directly in front of me. "She's been so blessed with her position at Pine Ridge, this is her opportunity to honor those who serve." The number at the bottom made my chest tighten: $347.68. Nearly a full day's pay after taxes. The table fell silent. Everyone suddenly interested in their water glasses or the mariachi music playing overhead. "I didn't invite everyone to lunch," I said quietly, my voice steady despite the heat crawling up my neck. "This wasn't my idea." Doug's expression shifted, the practiced warmth cooling to something harder. "We're family, Madison. Family supports each other. Don't embarrass your mother." My mother's fingers found my wrist under the table, squeezing with desperate pressure. Her eyes begged me to comply, to not make a scene, to preserve the fiction of our happy blended family. Around us, the volunteers shifted uncomfortably, caught between witnessing something inappropriate and maintaining their relationship with church leadership. "Supporting family doesn't mean paying for your performances," I said, standing slowly. My cloth napkin dropped onto my barely touched sandwich. "This isn't about generosity or service. It's about control." "Sit down," Doug hissed, his minister's voice dropping to something darker. "You're making a fool of yourself. What would the congregation think? They'd think you're a man who orders expensive meals he has no intention of paying for." I pulled 2 20s from my wallet, placing them on the table. "That covers my sandwich and tip. The rest is your responsibility." Lydia Monroe lifted her head, something flickering in her tired eyes: recognition, maybe, or relief that someone finally said it out loud. Others looked away, already distancing themselves from the conflict. "If you walk out that door," Doug's voice followed me as I grabbed my purse, "don't bother coming back to the house tonight. Your mother doesn't need this disrespect in her life." "It's my name on the lease, Doug," I reminded him, my hand on the door handle. "Mom lived with me before you came along. Remember." The last thing I heard before the door closed was my mother's voice, weak and placating, offering to cover the check with her credit card, the one I knew Doug controlled. As I walked to my car, my phone buzzed with her texts, begging me to come back, to apologize, to think about family unity. I sat in the parking lot for 10 minutes, watching through the window as Doug held court, probably spinning my exit into a testimony about dealing with difficult family members. The volunteers nodded along, complicit in their silence, while my mother shrank beside him, aging years and minutes. That's when I decided silence was complicity. Doug had pushed too far, presumed too much. The documentation I'd been collecting was about to become evidence. The man who preached about honor and dignity had just shown his true nature to a table full of witnesses. I drove home and started making real plans. The revelation came at 2:43 a.m. on a Tuesday, when insomnia and determination led me deep into the Compassion Fund's paper trail. My dining table had transformed into a makeshift investigation center: bank statements, donation receipts, and printed emails arranged in chronological order. The church's quarterly reports, downloaded from their website, lay marked with yellow highlighter and red pen corrections. The patterns were damning once you knew where to look. Every emergency assistance request Doug had pushed me to fund matched suspicious charges on his credit card statements I'd photographed during Sunday dinners when he'd leave his wallet carelessly on the counter. A $500 emergency fund for the Thompsons' medical bills appeared the same week as a $512 charge at Callaway Golf. The $800 for the Wilson family's car repairs coincided with designer clothing purchases from Nordstrom. But I needed more than suspicious timing. I needed proof of the fictitious nature of these charitable cases. That's where Lydia Monroe became invaluable. She appeared at my door on Thursday evening, holding a casserole dish like armor and looking over her shoulder as if Doug might materialize from the shadows. "I can't stay long," she said, stepping inside quickly. "But after Sunday, what you said, I thought you should know some things." Lydia had been the choir treasurer for 3 years, working adjacent to Doug's Compassion Fund. She'd noticed discrepancies but kept quiet, fearing the social suicide that came with challenging church leadership. Over reheated casserole, she revealed what she knew. "The Hendersons never received that medical fund," she whispered, even though we were alone. I asked Janet Henderson about it during choir practice, thanked her for letting the church help. She had no idea what I was talking about. Got really confused, actually. She pulled out her phone, showing me screenshots she'd been collecting. The Martinez family. They moved to Indiana 6 months ago, but Doug submitted a relief request for them last month. Her finger traced down the list. Half these families aren't even members anymore. Some never were. The scope of the deception stole my breath. How much? From what I can trace, at least $30,000 over the past 2 years. Maybe more. Noah Price entered the picture the following week. As an IT engineer at CivicLink Credit Union, he'd noticed unusual patterns in the church's accounts patterns that weren't technically illegal but raised ethical questions. We met at a coffee shop 2 towns over, away from Everton's watchful eyes. "I could lose my job for this," he said, sliding a folder across the table. "But my conscience won't let me stay quiet anymore." The documents showed Doug had opened multiple sub-accounts under the Compassion Fund umbrella, moving money between them in ways that obscured the final destinations. The complexity suggested premeditation, not mere mismanagement. "You need to document everything electronically," Noah advised, his fingers drumming nervously on his coffee cup. "Screenshots with timestamps, metadata intact. Save multiple copies in different locations. And Madison." He leaned forward. "Record him. Ohio's a one-party consent state. Get him talking about the fund." Why? I started carrying my phone differently, always ready to record. The opportunity came sooner than expected. Doug called me that Saturday, his voice strained with false concern. "Your mother's worried about you, Madison. This rebellion needs to stop. The family's reputation is built on stolen money." I kept my voice steady, watching the recording app's timer tick forward. "Those funds help real people," he snapped. "Sometimes the help isn't direct. Sometimes it's about maintaining the infrastructure that provides help." Infrastructure. Is that what you call your golf clubs? There was a pause. Then his voice dropped to that threatening register I'd grown to recognize. "You have no idea how this community works. The congregation needs leadership they can respect. That requires a certain presentation, the clothes, the activities. They're all ministry tools. So you admit you use the compassion fund for personal expenses. I admit nothing. But if you continue this witch hunt, Madison, you'll find yourself very alone in this town. Your mother, your job, your entire life here I have influence you can't imagine. Are you threatening me? Doug. I'm reminding you that family protects family, and those who betray family face consequences. The congregation only needs to hear the right story, and they'll believe whatever I tell them. The recording lasted 12 minutes. His admissions weren't complete confessions, but they revealed his mindset. The fund was his to manage as he saw fit, the congregation his to manipulate, and anyone who challenged him would be destroyed. I saved the file in 6 different locations, emailed it to a newly created secure account, and uploaded it to a cloud service Noah had recommended. Then I compiled everything into a comprehensive report: bank statements, testimonies, recordings, and a detailed timeline. Detective Marisol Alvarez at the Everton Police Department listened carefully when I presented my findings the following Monday. She made copies of everything, started an official file, and gave me advice that chilled me. This is good evidence, but these cases move slowly. He'll know you've reported him once we start investigating. You need to be prepared for retaliation. I had no idea how wrong I'd be. Doug's retaliation began at 7:22 p.m. on a Wednesday, when my phone lit up with notifications from Facebook. He'd crafted his attack carefully, posting in the Harvest Light Chapel community group, the Everton Community Board, and his own timeline with privacy settings wide open for maximum damage. With heavy hearts, we must address the spiritual crisis in our family. His post began, accompanied by a photo of our family at last year's church picnic, me standing slightly apart, unsmiling while he and Mom beamed at the camera. Despite our prayers and patience, Madison Hale has chosen to attack the very foundations of our ministry and family unity. The post was a masterpiece of manipulation. He painted himself as the long-suffering stepfather who'd welcomed me with open arms, only to face baseless accusations and disrespect. He mentioned my mental health struggles. I'd taken anxiety medication briefly in college, my history of rebellion, I'd lived with a boyfriend he'd never met, and my refusal to contribute to family harmony, the unpaid lunch bill. We've tried to help her, he wrote, but she's responded by spreading lies about our church's charitable work, attempting to undermine the compassion fund that has helped so many families. Perhaps jealousy over her mother's happiness has poisoned her heart. We ask for your prayers during this difficult time. Within an hour, the comments section became a public tribunal. Church members who'd smiled at me last Sunday now dissected my character with surgical precision. Always thought she seemed standoffish, wrote Barbara Collins, who'd never spoken 3 words to me. Poor Ruth, having such an ungrateful daughter, added Tom Mitchell, whose son Doug had supposedly helped through the Compassion Fund. My phone rang constantly. Mom called 11 times, leaving increasingly desperate voicemails. Madison, please, just apologize. He's willing to forgive if you take back the accusations. Think about what this is doing to me. Everyone's talking. I can't show my face at choir practice. I wanted to respond, to defend myself, to post the evidence I'd gathered. But Detective Alvarez had been clear. Don't engage. Anything you say online can be twisted in court. Let him dig his own grave. Noah Price texted me screenshots of Doug's posts spreading through other local Facebook groups. He's escalating. Document everything but don't respond. I'm backing up all his posts offline. By Thursday morning, my professional life became collateral damage. Someone had called Pine Ridge Medical Center, concerned about my stability. My supervisor, Janet, pulled me aside after the morning staff meeting. Madison, I don't believe a word of this garbage, she said, showing me printed Facebook posts someone had anonymously delivered. But the administration is nervous. Small-town politics and all. Just keep your head down, do your work, and this will blow over. The whispers followed me through the hospital corridors. Patients canceled appointments. Colleagues who'd invited me to lunch now found excuses to eat alone. The isolation Doug had threatened was materializing around me like walls built from rumors. Friday brought a new development. Doug posted a video himself sitting in his study, Bible prominently displayed, wearing his best concerned patriarch expression. "Family discord grieves the Lord," he intoned. "Oh, we're not asking for sides to be taken. We simply want our daughter to return to the light, to stop these hurtful fabrications that damage not just our family, but the entire church community." The performance was flawless. He'd cast himself as the victim while maintaining a veneer of Christian forgiveness. Comments poured in with Bible verses about honoring parents, warnings about bearing false witness, and promises to pray for my redemption. Lydia Monroe risked everything to secretly message me. Half the choir believes him, but some are asking questions. The timing with the restaurant incident has people wondering. Stay strong. Saturday afternoon. The campaign reached new lows. Someone I suspected Doug had mobilized his loyal followers created a Pray for Madison's Healing event page. They scheduled a prayer circle for Sunday after service to cast out the spirits of discord and deception that have taken hold of Ruth's daughter. My mother finally appeared at my apartment that evening, looking aged and hollow. "Please, Madison, just come tomorrow. Apologize. He'll forgive you, and things can go back to normal." Normal. I stared at her, this woman who'd raised me to be strong. "He's stealing from the church. Mom, I have proof." "I don't care." The words exploded from her, surprising us both. "I don't care about the money. I care about surviving in this town. You're young. You can leave. But this is my life, my community. If you destroy Doug, you destroy me too." She left without waiting for my response, her shoulders bent with the weight of choosing him over truth, community over her daughter. I sat in my empty apartment, scrolling through the digital mob assembling against me, and realized Doug had been right about one thing he did have influence I'd underestimated, but he'd made one crucial error. In his eagerness to destroy me publicly, he'd created a massive audience for what was coming. Every person following this drama, every member of those Facebook groups, every participant in tomorrow's prayer circle, they'd all be watching when I revealed the truth. I opened my laptop and began preparing my own social media posts, complete with redacted bank statements and audio clips. If Doug wanted a public war, he was about to get one, but I wouldn't fire the first shot online. I'd wait for the perfect moment, when the congregation was assembled, when running from the truth would be impossible. Sunday's autumn fundraising festival would be Doug's triumph or his downfall. He just didn't know it yet. Saturday night stretched until 4:15 a.m. as I assembled my arsenal for Sunday's confrontation. The dining table looked like a war room, documents arranged in precise order, recordings queued on multiple devices, and a detailed timeline of Doug's theft printed in large font. Every piece of evidence had been triple backed up, stored in places Doug could never reach. Noah arrived at my apartment at 8 a.m. sharp, carrying a small Bluetooth speaker and his laptop. "If we're doing this, we're doing it right," he said, his usual nervousness replaced with determination. "I've created a presentation that autoplays your evidence. All you need to do is hit one button." "The church's Wi-Fi," I asked, "already have the password. Benefits of helping them set up their online donation system last year." He pulled out a tiny device. "This is a portable hotspot, backup in case they cut the church internet. The speaker will amplify your phone recordings so everyone can hear clearly." Lydia knocked an hour later, carrying a red folder thick with photocopies. "Every questionable transaction from the past 2 years," she said, her hands trembling slightly. "I made 12 copies. Also, I spoke with 5 families Doug claimed to help. 3 are willing to state publicly they never received funds. The Washingtons are even driving back from Columbus to be there tomorrow. You could lose your position for this," I warned her. "Some things matter more than positions." She straightened her shoulders. "Besides, I'm tired of watching him parade around like God's chosen while stealing from people who can barely afford groceries." Detective Alvarez called at noon with crucial information. I can't officially be there tomorrow, but I'll be nearby. If he touches you, if he threatens you physically, call immediately. I've also informed patrol units to be in the area around 11:30. We can't arrest him based on financial crimes without a complete investigation. But assault, that's immediate grounds. You think he'll get violent? Cornered men do desperate things. The temporary protection order is ready to file Monday morning, but tomorrow you're vulnerable. Be careful. I spent the afternoon preparing myself mentally, rehearsing what I'd say, anticipating Doug's counterattacks. My phone buzzed constantly with messages from church members, some supportive but afraid to say so publicly, others condemning me with biblical fury. I ignored them all. At 6 p.m., an unexpected ally emerged. Pastor Williams called, his voice careful and measured. Madison, I can't take sides before seeing evidence, but I want you to know that if what you're suggesting is true, you'll have my full support. The church's financial committee has actually had concerns about some discrepancies. We've scheduled an emergency meeting for Monday. Why not investigate before then? Politics. Unfortunately, Doug has powerful supporters, but if evidence emerges publicly tomorrow— He paused meaningfully. Well, we'd have to act immediately. As night fell, I made final preparations. The red folder went into my bag, along with my fully charged phone and a backup battery. Noah's speaker fit in my coat pocket. I'd wear my most conservative dress, navy blue, high neckline, the picture of respectability. Let them see Madison Hale, professional healthcare worker, not the troubled rebel Doug had painted. Mom texted at 10:45 p. Please don't come tomorrow. Doug is planning something. He has supporters ready to escort you out if you show up. I responded, I'll be there. The truth needs witnesses. She didn't reply. I printed one final document, a notarized statement from 3 separate banks confirming the suspicious transactions, obtained through the official fraud investigation Detective Alvarez had quietly initiated. This was my nuclear option. Proof that law enforcement was already involved. I sealed it in an envelope addressed to Pastor Williams. Noah had suggested a brilliant touch. Upload everything to a scheduled post on multiple platforms. Set it for noon 15. If something happens to your phone, if they silence you, the internet will speak for you. I created posts for Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, attaching every piece of evidence, every recording, every bank statement. The caption read simply, "The truth about the Compassion Fund, documentation below." My finger hovered over the scheduling button before pressing it decisively. At midnight, I stood before my bathroom mirror, practicing my expression calm, dignified, unshakable. Doug had spent weeks painting me as unstable and vindictive. Tomorrow, I'd show them the opposite. I'd be the eye of the storm while he raged around me. A text from Noah at 1 a. Security cameras in the parking lot are functioning. Whatever happens will be recorded. Another from Lydia. 16 choir members are planning to stand with you. We won't let you face this alone. I finally lay down at 2:30, not to sleep, but to rest. Tomorrow would be the culmination of everything Doug's lies, my evidence, the congregation's moment of truth. He'd arranged the stage perfectly with his public attacks, ensuring maximum attention for the autumn fundraising festival. The irony wasn't lost on me. The man who'd weaponized public opinion was about to be destroyed by it. My phone showed one final message, this one from an unknown number. Doug Whitaker has hurt many families. Tomorrow, he falls. Thank you for your courage. I closed my eyes, visualizing the moment the crowd assembled, Doug in his element, confident in his control. Then the shattering of his carefully constructed image as truth poured out like water breaking through a dam. Sunday couldn't come fast enough. The church parking lot was already crowded when I arrived at 11:45 a.m., 15 minutes after the service ended. The autumn fundraising festival had drawn even non-regular attendees, with booths selling pumpkin bread and apple cider, children running between games, and the congregation mingling in their Sunday best. I parked strategically near the exit, leaving my engine running for 30 seconds while I steadied my breathing. Through my windshield, I could see Doug holding court near the church entrance, surrounded by his inner circle of supporters. He wore his best charcoal suit, the one he'd bought with emergency funds, meant for the Riverside family's flood damage. My mother stood beside him, her smile brittle as autumn leaves, her eyes scanning the crowd. I stepped out of my car, and the atmosphere shifted immediately. Conversations stuttered to stops. Parents pulled children closer. A path opened before me, not out of respect, but the way people step back from an accident about to happen. "She actually came," someone whispered. "After everything she's done to that poor family," another voice added. Doug spotted me when I was 20 feet away. His expression transformed surprise, then anger, then a calculated satisfaction that made my stomach clench. He'd wanted this public confrontation. He thought he controlled the narrative. "Madison," he called out, his voice carrying across the parking lot with practiced authority. "I'm glad you've come. Perhaps we can finally address your troubles with prayer and community support." He moved toward me, his supporters flanking him like disciples. The crowd naturally formed a circle, phones already out, recording what they expected to be my humiliation. The autumn sun cast sharp shadows across the asphalt, and the smell of cinnamon from the bake sale mixed nauseously with my anxiety. "I came to tell the truth," I said, my voice steadier than my hands. "About the Compassion Fund. About where the money really goes." Doug's face darkened, but he maintained his composure. "Your mother warned me about this, these delusions, these accusations born from jealousy and mental instability." He turned to address the crowd. "We've tried to help her, but sometimes people refuse grace." "Is that what you call stealing?" I pulled out my phone, noting how several people stepped back as if I might have a weapon. $30,000. Doug. $30,000 stolen from families who needed help. "Lies," he said firmly, moving closer. "Desperate lies from a troubled young woman who can't accept her mother's happiness." He was 10 feet away now, close enough that I could see the vein pulsing in his temple, the sweat beating despite the cool October air. His supporters murmured agreement, but I noticed others watching silently, waiting. "The Henderson Medical Fund," I said loudly. $500. The Hendersons never received it. The Martinez Car Repair Fund they'd already moved to Indiana. "The Washington Family Emergency. They're here today to confirm they never saw a penny." As if on cue, Robert Washington stepped forward from the crowd. "It's true. We were told the fund was depleted when we applied, but Doug reported raising $2,000 for us that same month." Doug's carefully constructed mask slipped. "You're confused. Robert, the funds were distributed through proper channels." "Your personal account isn't a proper channel," Lydia announced, emerging from the crowd with her red folder. "I have the receipts." The circle around us widened, whispers rising like wind through wheat. Doug's supporters looked uncertain now, glancing between their leader and the growing number of accusers. "This is an ambush," Doug snarled, his ministerial tone abandoned. "A coordinated attack on my ministry." He stalked toward me, his face flushed with rage. "You poisoned them against me." "You turned my own congregation. I showed them evidence," I interrupted, holding my ground as he approached. "Bank statements, recordings, truth." He was in my space now, close enough that I could smell his cologne mixed with fury. "You little bitch," he hissed, low enough that only those nearest could hear. "You've destroyed everything. Your mother, our reputation, the church's unity, all because you couldn't accept your place." "My place." I kept my voice raised, ensuring everyone could hear. "Paying for your golf clubs while families went hungry, funding your vacations while pretending it was charity." His hand moved so fast I barely saw it coming. The slap connected with my left cheek, the sound cracking across the parking lot like a gunshot. The force sent me stumbling sideways, my phone flying from my hand onto the asphalt. The crowd gasped collectively. Several people stepped forward, then stopped, uncertain whether to intervene. My cheek burned, and I could taste copper where my teeth had cut the inside of my mouth. But I didn't cry. I didn't run. I didn't even raise my hand to my face. Instead, I slowly reached into my pocket and pulled out Noah's Bluetooth speaker, already connected to my phone lying 3 feet away. With deliberate calm, I pressed play. Doug's voice filled the parking lot, crystal clear and undeniable. The congregation only needs to hear the right story, and they'll believe whatever I tell them. Doug's recorded voice boomed across the parking lot. The Bluetooth speaker's clarity was perfect, every word cutting through the October air. Sometimes the help isn't direct. The clothes, the activities, they're all ministry tools. The crowd stood frozen as the recording continued. Doug's own words condemned him admitting to using funds for personal expenses, threatening my job, calling the congregation sheep who only need a pretty story. Turn that off. Doug lunged for the speaker, but Noah stepped between us, his laptop already open, displaying bank statements on a screen he'd turned toward the crowd. "That's my golf club purchase," Noah announced, pointing to the screen. "Same day as the Henderson Medical Fund. Here's his Nordstrom charge, matching the Wilson family aid request." Lydia moved through the crowd, distributing copies of the red folder. "Every suspicious transaction is documented here. 3 years of theft disguised as charity." An elderly woman, Martha Brennan, began to cry. "I donated my husband's life insurance payment to that fund. $10,000 meant for families like mine when I was struggling." "This is fabricated," Doug shouted, but his voice had lost its authority. He spun toward Pastor Williams, who had emerged from the church. Tell them this is lies." Pastor Williams held up the envelope I'd sent him. "I've just reviewed the notarized bank statements Madison provided. I'm calling an emergency board meeting. Doug, you're suspended from all church positions effective immediately." The transformation in the crowd was immediate and visceral. Supporters who'd flanked Doug moments ago stepped away as if his corruption was contagious. Parents who'd brought their children to see the troubled daughter confronted now shielded young eyes from the spectacular fall of a church leader. "You did this." Doug turned on me, spittle flying from his lips. "You destroyed a good man's work." "No," said Robert Washington, stepping forward. "You destroyed it when you stole from us." More voices joined his. "My mother needed that cancer treatment money. We lost our home while you vacationed. My kids went hungry." The crowd's energy shifted from shock to anger. They pressed closer to Doug, their faces twisted with betrayal and rage. Someone threw a festival program at him. Another spat at his feet. Detective Alvarez chose that moment to arrive, her unmarked car pulling directly into the circle. She emerged with 2 uniformed officers, their presence immediately commanding attention. "Douglas Whitaker," she announced, her voice carrying official weight. "You're under arrest for assault." "This is ridiculous," Doug protested as an officer approached with handcuffs. "A small family dispute?" Witnessed by over 50 people and captured on multiple phones. Alvarez interrupted. She nodded toward the crowd, where indeed dozens of phones were still recording. "And we'll be investigating the fraud allegations immediately." As the handcuffs clicked around Doug's wrists, my mother finally broke her silence. She rushed toward him, then stopped, looking between us with anguish. "Doug, tell them it's not true. Tell them you didn't steal." He looked at her, and for a moment, his mask completely fell. "Ruth, call my lawyer. Don't say anything to anyone." Not a denial. Not a reassurance. Just self-preservation. My mother's face crumbled as she understood. The congregation she'd valued above her daughter. The man she'd chosen over family. The reputation she'd protected, all built on lies. The officers guided Doug toward the patrol car. As they passed me, he leaned as close as his restraints allowed. "This isn't over." "Yes," I said quietly. "It is." The crowd parted for the police car, watching in stunned silence as their former leader was driven away. Then, slowly, they turned to me, some with apology in their eyes, others with lingering suspicion, but many with something like respect. Martha Brennan approached first, touching my swollen cheek gently. "I'm sorry we didn't listen sooner." Others followed. The Washingtons, Several choir members, even some who'd commented viciously on Doug's Facebook posts, now murmured apologies or squeezed my shoulder as they passed. Pastor Williams raised his voice. The autumn festival is canceled. The church board will meet immediately. Any funds in the compassion account are frozen pending investigation. Madison, he turned to me, would you be willing to help us audit the accounts? I nodded, suddenly exhausted as adrenaline drained away. The crowd began dispersing, but not before I heard the whispers starting. I always thought something was off. Never liked how he treated Ruth. Madison was brave to stand up. The same people who'd crucified me online were already rewriting history, casting themselves as skeptics who'd suspected Doug all along. But I didn't care about their revisionism. The truth was out. Lydia stood beside me as the parking lot emptied. You did it. We did it, I corrected, watching Noah pack up his equipment, seeing the Washingtons comforting other victims, observing Pastor Williams already on his phone with the district superintendent. The crowd had turned, just as the title promised. The man who'd controlled them through manipulation and fear was gone. His empire of lies collapsed in barely 15 minutes. The autumn sun felt warmer now, the air cleaner somehow. My phone, retrieved from the asphalt, showed the scheduled social media posts had been canceled, no longer necessary. The truth had found its audience without digital amplification. But the best part, Doug's own words had condemned him. The recording continued to echo in my mind. Sheep who only need a pretty story. Today, the sheep had finally heard the truth. The parking lot emptied slowly, like water draining from a broken vessel. I stood in the aftermath, touching the tender spot on my cheek where Doug's hand had connected, feeling the sting that proved this wasn't a dream. The asphalt still held the chalk marks from the children's games, now scuffed by the crowd's movement, and somehow that small detail, the juxtaposition of innocence and corruption, made everything real. A young boy from the Sunday school program approached with a juice box and a bag of frozen peas from the festival cooler. My mom says to put this on your face, he whispered, then ran back to his parents, who nodded at me from across the lot, a small gesture that meant everything. Pastor Williams emerged from his emergency meeting 40 minutes later, his face grave but determined. The board voted unanimously. Doug's access to all accounts is revoked. We're hiring an external auditor Monday morning. Madison, the church owes you an apology. I owe you an apology. Just make it right for the families he stole from, I said, pressing the frozen peas against my cheek. My mother still stood where Doug had been arrested, staring at the oil stain on the asphalt as if it might explain how she'd been so blind. I walked over slowly, each step measured, giving her time to run if she wanted. She didn't. Madison, she started, then stopped, then tried again. I chose him over you. Yes, I said simply. You did. I was so afraid of being alone again, of losing the life we'd built. She looked up, and I saw she'd aged years in the past hour. But I lost you instead. I wanted to comfort her, to say it was okay, that we'd heal. But some truths needed to sit heavy before forgiveness could lift them. I'm going home, Mom. Call me when you're ready to really talk, not just smooth things over. As I walked to my car, I passed the scattered red folders Lydia had distributed, their contents fluttering in the breeze like autumn leaves. Evidence of Doug's crimes spreading across the church grounds. Impossible to gather back up. Impossible to hide. The financial documents showed more than theft. They revealed a pattern of exploitation that would take months to fully uncover. But that was tomorrow's work. Today was about the instant when truth met consequences. When a man who'd wielded God like a weapon discovered that faith and fraud couldn't coexist indefinitely. Noah waited by my car, laptop bag slung over his shoulder. The recording's been backed up to 3 secure servers. Detective Alvarez has copies of everything. Doug's lawyer can't make this disappear. Thank you, I said, meaning more than just the technical support, for believing me when no one else would. Someone had to, he said simply. Bullies in pulpits are still just bullies. I drove home slowly, watching Everton pass by the small shops, the familiar streets, the places where people had whispered about me just hours ago. My phone buzzed constantly with messages, but I didn't check them. The time for public performance was over. At my apartment, I sat at the dining table where this investigation had begun, looking at the empty surface where evidence had been spread like battle plans. The war was won, but victories like this left scars on everyone, even the victors. I thought about Doug in his holding cell, probably still crafting justifications, still believing himself persecuted rather than prosecuted. He'd call it a witch hunt, claim religious persecution, maybe even find followers who'd believe his martyrdom narrative. But the facts would speak louder than his fiction. The judge would see bank statements, not sermons. The sun set over Everton, painting the sky in shades of justice orange like the jumpsuit Doug would wear, red like the folders that exposed him, purple like the bruise forming on my cheek. Tomorrow, I'd help the church audit their accounts. Tomorrow, I'd return to work and face my colleagues' awkward apologies. Tomorrow, I'd begin rebuilding the life Doug had tried to destroy. But tonight, I sat in the quiet aftermath of a storm I'd summoned, feeling the strange peace that comes from standing in truth, even when it costs everything. The recording played once more in my mind, not Doug's threats, but the crowd's gasp when they finally heard them. That moment when collective delusion shattered, when the people who'd condemned me realized they'd been defending a thief. My reflection in the window showed a woman with a swollen cheek and tired eyes, but also something else, someone who'd refused to be silenced, who'd gathered evidence like armor and worn truth like a weapon. Madison Hale, who'd brought receipts to a faith fight and won. The church bells rang 8 o'clock, their sound carrying across town like they did every Sunday evening, but tonight, they sounded different, less like a call to worship, more like an ending, or perhaps a beginning. In that parking lot, in broad daylight, justice had been served not with a whisper, but with a roar. The crowd had turned, just as I'd known they would when faced with undeniable truth. Sometimes the greatest revenge isn't destroying your enemy, it's simply removing their mask and letting everyone see what was always underneath. The bruise would fade, the scandal would become gossip, then memory, then cautionary tale. But that moment when Doug's own words condemned him, when his slap became the catalyst for his downfall, when the crowd turned from him to me, that was forever. I closed my eyes and smiled. Thank you for listening to my story. I'd love to know where you're listening from. Please comment below and let's connect. If this story resonated with you, consider subscribing to hear more tales of truth triumphing over corruption. Share your thoughts about standing up to bullies in your own life. Sometimes the most powerful revenge is simply refusing to stay silent.